Hello and welcome to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman. I am here with my co-host, Kim Clunian of 12 News. And today, Kim, we have a lot to talk about, and it's all State House focused.
Yes, it is the start of the legislative session, which at our household, Ted Nesi is my husband, full disclosure, it's like the Super Bowl. Comes early.
I know, there are like a couple moments at the State House that are super, like, there's so much attention being given to it. This is now, and sort of when the House comes out with its version of a budget towards the end of the session in the spring.
I'm glad they spaced those things out for us all.
Give us a little break that are not covering it every day, like our guest this week, who is, we'll bring her in. It's Nancy Lavin of the Rhode Island Current. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we're excited to have you on, Nancy, and I just told you before the show that you're our first guest that's been invited back. So you're the first person that's been on for the second time.
I needed a do-over.
We have too much to talk with you about. That's the thing, and you do such a great job.
Thank you.
So Nancy covers the State House, as I mentioned, and she's really good at writing about government and politics and policy. And for this first block, Nancy, I want to focus on the state of the state, which you attended yourself, and it was Governor Dan McKee's annual address, sort of setting the stage for how the state is doing right now. But to set the stage, I actually want to bring in said Ted Nesi, who did a package on that for our 10 o'clock show on Tuesday, and it sort of sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about. So take a listen.
In some ways, tonight marked an unofficial re-election kickoff for McKee as he seeks to become the longest-serving governor in well over a century.
Rhode Island is strong.
Governor Dan McKee telling voters Rhode Island is doing better than they may think.
And as I travel and talk to people, and I share with them the things that are happening in the state that are good, what they say to me is, I didn't know that.
The governor's roughly 48-minute State of the State focused heavily on the cost of living as McKee rolled out what he's calling an affordability for all agenda. It includes eliminating all taxes on Social Security, creating a new $325 child tax credit, reversing a recent 2-cent gas tax increase, and subsidizing Health Source RI insurance plans.
Let's keep $215 million in people's pockets in the first year. And let's keep fighting for an affordable future that Rhode Islanders deserve.
McKee also argued the White House is making the problem worse.
President Trump has made life more expensive at every turn.
The speech comes as the governor is struggling with low poll numbers. A survey last fall showed him running third in a potential Democratic primary against former CVS executive Helena Foulkes and House Speaker Joe Shekarchi. Speaking to reporters Tuesday, Foulkes slammed McKee's handling of the Washington Bridge crisis.
You know, the governor told us there'd be a day of reckoning. There's been no day of reckoning. Nothing has changed at the DOT.
McKee said he's taking steps to address the criticism.
My budget will include additional engineering oversight at the Rhode Island Department of Transportation to review inspection reports and ensure that abrupt closures like this never happen again.
Shekarchi, as a legislative leader, was on the rostrum next to McKee for the speech. He continues to be coy about whether he'll join the race for governor. Speaker, do you think you'll be up there giving this speech next year?
I have no idea, Ted.
So there you have it. And Nancy, you've covered a lot of Governor McKee's State of the States in your time covering Rhode Island. And I'm wondering if there was anything about this speech in particular that jumped out to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's more of the same. You know, I think regardless of who the governor is, the State of the State is kind of what we saw in that clip, a lot of promises. There's not a lot of detail. It's, as a reporter, in some ways, I was saying to you before we started, it's a little bit easier to write about than when the actual budget comes out, because you don't have to do all this like back of the napkin math, because there is no napkin math yet to do. But at the same time, it's also hard because there's these like big amorphous ideas without any details. I think the one thing that really made this address different is that we know McKee is up for re-election this year. We know he, as Ted said, has low approval ratings, has at least one serious Democratic rival, maybe a second. So this really was not so subtly kind of his pledge to voters. And I think the way that he's trying to appeal to voters is, I'm going to save you money.
And I just want to note, you make a good point. We are taping this on a Wednesday afternoon. The speech was given on a Tuesday, and on Thursday is when they actually come out with the physical budget proposal from the governor that lays out all of these priorities that he's talking about in a big idea form into actual dollars and cents. So we'll have more of that later in this week, but we don't know those numbers except for what he disclosed during his speech right now. Kim?
Well, what did you think? I mean, because so many of us watch it from the comfort of our living rooms. What's it like when you're in that room? What's sort of the temperature? What's the reaction that you heard from other people who were listening in on that speech in the room?
Yeah, I will say one thing that I think made this year at least different than last year, although more of a return to normal, is that last year, there was this People's State of the State happening a floor below that you could hear the boos, you could hear the jeers, because mostly, not that they were necessarily pissed at the governor, but they were upset that they were being blocked from public access. And that was sort of worked out ahead of time this year, so it wasn't as rowdy. The people in the room are not going to boo at the governor, even if they say something.
This isn't Parliament.
Right. Even if he says something they don't like. I mean, for the most part, it's his cabinet members, it's judges, dignitaries, his special guests, and then lawmakers. I will say it did seem like lawmakers on both sides had more to say this year, and just kind of chatting with some of them than usual in terms of not necessarily what was said, but what was not said.
In what were some of those
So
things?
I think for, progressive Democrats, they really wanted to hear McKee explicitly say that he is going to propose some form of a tax on top earners, a millionaire's tax in his budget. And the Speaker Shekarchi confirmed to us reporters when asked specifically about this after the speech, yes, the governor's budget has this. But McKee didn't say that in his speech. And I think progressive Democrats were kind of like, if you're touting this affordability for all agenda, part of that is about, this fair share idea that we've been promoting. And also, this is a revenue source that will pay for all of these expensive, save people $250 million a year. Like, how are we going to pay for that? I think on the Republican side, House Minority Leader Chippendale delivered the rebuttal for Republicans and kind of reprise what are classic Republican talking points about, like, what are we getting for all this money? Our spending is going up, our revenue is not growing at the same pace, and talking about affordability for all is great, but it's ultimately state taxpayers who may end up having to pay for some of these programs and tax cuts and that kind of thing.
Do you think that omission, Nancy, not talking about this so-called millionaire's tax, I mean, obviously we've been talking about this happening under the umbrella of it being an election year. Do you think that was a political tactic not to mention that?
I'm not sure. It does seem like something that definitely at the State House has broad support from lawmakers. I think obviously there are some voters who would be for it and some who would be against it, but it was a little bit strange to me that the governor would do an interview with the Boston Globe a few days before and, kind of coyly say, like, yeah, this is going to happen this year, or I'm reconsidering my position, but then not say anything about that in the speech. And I think one could make the counter argument, well, the speech is not really where he gets into specifics, but he did get into a lot of other specifics that could make some people upset. Rolling back the gas tax hike, which was just approved and is supposed to help RIPTA close its budget deficit, so that certainly isn't going to make transit advocates or environmental advocates happy. Eliminating the tax on Social Security income is something that the ARP has said is its top priority, but as some of my colleagues have noted already, we have exemptions on state income taxes on Social Security up to, I think, $137,000. So it's not everyone who's paying these taxes now, and it's about $40 million in state revenue that we're going to be projected to lose if we go forward with this, which is not insubstantial.
Yeah, it's hard. It was a lot of spending I heard during that speech, and not a lot of details on how it was going to be paid for, which is always the big question when you have a $100 million deficit in the state budget. So those details will come out when we do get the budget. But for now, we do need to take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of the other legislative priorities that are swirling around Smith Hill. Stick with us. Welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, alongside my co-host, Kim Kalunian of 12 News. Our guest today is Nancy Lavin of the Rhode Island Current, and we are talking State House politics and policy. And Nancy, I want to talk about a story you did a couple weeks ago that previewing the legislative session. It was called Rhode Island Lawmakers Are Back in Action on Tuesday, which already happened. Here's what awaits them. You did a really, really good broad job on talking about all of the sort of things that you're expecting and others at the State House are expecting will be priorities and focuses of the legislative session, which runs now until usually the end of June. You, at the top of your list, had healthcare. And I'm just wondering, you know, we've heard a lot about housing in many of the prior legislative sessions. It feels like maybe there is a pivot where healthcare was always part of the conversation, that maybe there is this pivot this year where healthcare really is going to be the top priority at the State House. Is that your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the House Speaker, who's been the person who's really been leading the charge on housing in both chambers, even kind of acknowledged like healthcare is the top priority this year, and that's in large part because of these federal budget cuts that some of them have already happened, a lot of them are soon to come, but we know are going to have major implications for Rhode Island residents, for hospitals, for nursing homes, for insurance companies. We're already seeing all of these consequences now. So I think that has sort of forced the legislature, whether they wanted to or not, to really like go into crisis mode on healthcare.
And when we talk about healthcare, we can't not talk about the sort of uncertainty about Fatima and Roger Williams, and there's talk now of maybe the state needing to actually step in and take over these hospitals, depending on what happens with the bankruptcy hearing that's been ongoing for so long now. If that shoe drops, that's got to blow up the legislative session, right? Because then they have to figure out, how are we going to afford this? How are we going to step in? What's our role?
I think that's a definite possibility. You know, yesterday, Senate President Valerie Lawson said that this is the biggest issue facing Rhode Island right now. I don't think a lot of Rhode Islanders in their day-to-day lives right now are necessarily, like, watching to see if the buyer for these hospitals is going to, like, secure the investors. But the consequences, as you said, if they can't secure the financing, close the deal, which is supposed to be happening by January 15th, could be, you know, worst case scenario, the hospitals close, which is, I think, a thing that everyone is trying to avoid. The Attorney General has laid out this path where we might be able to do some sort of state-appointed receivership. Obviously not ideal, but that would also require some additional, most likely, state funding, which is not something that's really been talked about in any sort of concrete terms. Even the governor in his State of the State yesterday gave this kind of vague, we'll do everything in our power, but we don't really know what that means in a policy or in a funding perspective. You know, there might be some federal funding, but it would seem that also we would be using some of our precious state dollars for this too.
Yeah, it does seem interesting. There's a lot of competing priorities, and for the first time, seemingly in years, there isn't as much of a glut of revenue coming in from the federal government, so it should be fun to see how that plays out. I want to switch gears a little bit to ask you, because as we mentioned off the top in the first segment of this show, it is an election year. The governor's race is happening, all the statewide offices are happening, as are all of the General Assembly positions. And I wonder, Nancy, in your experience covering the State House, how does that influence policy and how things get done and the focus of the General Assembly in your experience covering them during election years?
I mean, it's interesting because I asked both the Speaker and the Senate President about this specifically when I was doing my sort of preview story. I interviewed them, you know, both separately in December in anticipation of writing the story that ran at the beginning of the year. And they are both, of course, not going to say that their own reelection campaigns, or in the case of the Speaker, perhaps a gubernatorial campaign, or those of any of their other members impact the work they do. But that's not necessarily, I think, the reality. Definitely one thing that I think people are looking at is that, you know, how they vote on controversial legislation is going to be more scrutinized by voters this year than maybe last year. On the flip side, all of 113 members of the General Assembly are up for re-election every 2 years. So it's not like they have this 4 or 6 year window where for, you know, a big chunk in the middle, they're kind of not being beholden. So I think even, for example, last year, the big controversial legislation and how people voted on it was the assault weapons ban. And I think that how lawmakers voted last year was a big impetus for certain people, posing challenges this year. So in some ways it does make a difference. In some ways it's kind of the same, because really every year is sort of getting ready for a re-election year or re-election year. We know the governor and Helena Foulkes have been battling each other in preparation for the 2026 gubernatorial primary basically since 2022. So
So true.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, the gun reform debate, when talking to lawmakers last year, a lot of them were saying, we want to do this in an off-election year because of just the reasons that you've spelled out. It's easier to try and get through such a controversial piece of legislation when, we're still a year and change away from the ballot box. Is there one of those hot-button issues that you see coming down the pike, or any other sleeper sort of issues this year that you think might, be turn into hot debate in June, if you will?
There's nothing that, I will say gun safety issues do seem to sort of ignite this passion on both sides that few other issues do. Even something like a millionaire's tax, while the people who are for it are really passionate, income taxes just in general aren't as pulse quickening as guns.
It's an emotional
except
issue
for on
a lot
this
of people.
show.
Right. I mean, I do think another potential one could be immigration, but that's not, again, something that we see a lot of policy really happening in Rhode Island around. One, I don't know if it's a sleeper issue, but Helena Foulkes has already come out with this proposal, which has come up in legislative sessions before, that lawmakers and general office holders should not be allowed to take campaign donations from lobbyists during the 6-month legislative session, which is something that some other states have, limits around, and lawmakers generally don't want to do this. But I think that could become a little bit more of an issue this year, just because the sort of primary gubernatorial challenger is bringing this to light, and the idea that, the auto insurance industry is, giving $1 million to this person and that person, and then they're passing these bills. I think, the intermingling there is definitely something that may get a little bit more attention this year.
Yeah, there it is. The unofficial. So the start of the legislative session is also the unofficial start of fundraising season.
Yes.
So you saw it even. The Speaker of the House had a fundraiser just after the session started, raised a boatload of money through reports, and you do question what a great investment to come in, give the Speaker of the House some money who's making decisions on this, and who might have a chance at least to win the Democratic candidacy if he jumps into the run for governor. Nancy, that is all the time that we have with you today, but we want to thank you so much for coming on the show. If people do not follow Nancy and her coverage and the coverage of her team at the Rhode Island Current, you definitely should. Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
When we come back, the stories we wish we wrote. Stick with us. Welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm your host, Eli Sherman, here alongside my co-host, Kim Kalunian of 12 News. We are entering into the final segment of our show, the stories we wish we wrote, where we like to talk about other great reporting that's happening around the region. And we have some really exciting stories today that I'm looking forward to talking to you about. Kim, why don't you start with yours?
Okay, so it's mid-January, but I'm still sort of in the holiday spirit. I was watching The Nutcracker last night. It's a year-round watch in my house, but this piece also harkens back to the holidays. It's called How a Small Town in Rhode Island is Connected to It's a Wonderful Life. This is by our good friend Pamela Watts over at Ocean State Media. And I never knew this. I mean, how many times have I seen It's a Wonderful Life? Never knew that there's a possibility that the town, Bedford Falls, in It's a Wonderful Life could be based on Little Compton. So she dives into that theory, and there's a place in New York, Seneca Falls, that says,
I did see a lot of pushback when that story came out from Seneca Falls, which was like, no, it's upstate New York. But
I love this theory, too, because she gets into the fact that Little Compton is between New Bedford and Fall River. Bedford Falls. So I don't know. It could be true.
Yeah, that is it. It was a well-timed piece for this time of year.
Really great.
How many people watch that movie.
Oh, every
It's
year.
just every year.
Every year.
I have one out of southeastern Massachusetts from the New Bedford Light by Colin Hogan. It's called The Rise, Fall, and Rise Again of the Zeiterion.
Zeiterion. Yes.
Thank you.
You're
They
welcome.
call it the Z, I think.
Yes.
And it is a story about the Zeitz brothers.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. Who were New Bedford's movie moguls. And the family came over, I think, at the turn of the century, 1900s, and they sort of got into movie theaters in the roaring 20s, and then they did massively successful in New Bedford, rubbing shoulders with people like Alfred Hitchcock. And then they sort of hit a wall in the 1960s when JFK sort of took over in TV, like became such a
Yes.
well-watched person in TV, and TV sort of took over from theaters. And now, of course, they're making, they're reemerging. They've done a bunch of renovations and are storming back. To
Yeah,
their
that's
prom.
happened to so many of those movie houses that have become live performance spaces. I think about the Columbus Theater down in Providence, and the Zeiterion is such a gem. I've had the opportunity to perform there myself. It's a beautiful theater, and I'm happy it's
Beautiful
alive.
building.
It's
I'm
great.
glad that they're preserving it in
Yes.
that way. You have a tasty one for your next one.
I love food. You know this. I know you're a foodie
Shocker.
too. This is by Faith Harrington over at the Standard Times. And this is about another viral TikTok trend when it comes to desserts. I know we've talked about viral food trends before. This one, even though I can't eat it because I'm allergic to mangoes, it sounds amazing. There are these like realistic fruits. They look like a mango, for example, but then you bite into it and it's like sponge cake and mousse and like all of this great, amazing, pastry inside. And the donut factory in Fairhaven, the woman there, Jackie Webb, she was like, I think she said it was her niece was like driving super far to get these desserts. And she's like, I'll just make them. And now they're selling out. So now you don't have to go anywhere crazy to try and find these amazing TikTok desserts. You can go right to Fairhaven.
Well, it made me think, and we talked about this when you sent me this story, is about that Netflix show where they make cakes.
Is it cake?
Is it cake? And do they cut into the cake? And some of them are cakes and some of them are not.
Is it a mango? Is it a cake? Is it both?
And it sounds like maybe you could eat them if it was shaped in a mango but made of something else.
Yes, true.
All right, real quickly, the last thing was from the Westerly Sun. The Sun is changing to better serve you by Alex Nunez. They are going to end their Monday edition along with the Guide, which is their arts and culture section, because they say they want to focus more on local reporting. And to do that, they need to scale back on sort of the pagination and the production of their newspaper. So not necessarily a story I wish I wrote, but I felt like this is a good place to talk about it.
Yeah.
That is all the time that we have for today. But if you want, you can go check out this full episode online and on our podcast. But for now, for Kim Kalunian, I'm Eli Sherman. Thanks for watching Behind the Story.